welcome to Circle of Friends. This is Amy Whitney with my very special guest, Idara Bassey. Idara, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Amy.
Now, I'm just looking through your list of skills here, and the only way I can describe them is they're absolutely beautiful and eclectic. Now, I'm just going to name a few here. We've got you're a professional life coach, an attorney, a professional intuitive, you're an author, and the list goes on. Now, when I see a list like that, all I can think of is there has got to be a story here. So, to start the interview, do you mind giving us a little bit of background details about yourself?
Sure, absolutely, and I think you're right. There's always a story, and I think it's stories that inform our journey and enrich our journey and make it define what we have to give. And I don't think my life has been any exception. But let me see if I could try to get this in an hour or less. Well, this is very interesting because I have to say, I was raised in a household where my parents actually left the Catholic Church in the 50s, which back then was a really gutsy thing to do. And because they had some questions, and they felt that the church wasn't necessarily answering the questions that they had. And more significantly, my father had enrolled in a mystical order called the Rosicrucians back in '54, and they were known for their metaphysical teachings and that type of thing. And as I was growing up, we were raised to be Christians, but non-denominational, with the idea being that you can find God just as easily in a grove of trees as a church building on Sunday morning. And a corollary to that, the idea being that all of us had a spark of divinity within us. So those are the ideas that were kind of swirling around in my household from a very early age. So I didn't think anything different because that's what I knew. But then, interacting with people outside of the household and learning that we didn't go to church every weekend, you got your messages about, oh, you're going to hell, you're doing this and that and the other thing. And I thought, well, but my parents told me, so there's got to be right. So that was kind of like walking that fine line between, the exterior messages that you would hear about spirituality and religion and, what I was learning at home. But I think I really waited to my late teens to take the reins as far as my own personal spirituality was concerned, and that's when I started working with affirmations, and then if you fast forward to law school, during my legal training, which was definitely what I would probably consider to be hell on earth, it became very clear that I wasn't necessarily getting a lot of support and validation from without. I mean, I was a woman of color, still am a woman of color, attending a primarily studying within a primarily male-dominated field, and so it occurred to me that, well, if I'm not getting a lot of support and validation from without, I'm going to have to develop some inner resources, or I'm not going to make it through this experience. And so I always joke that I went into, I came out of law school much more intuitive and inner focused than when I went in, strictly because, it's more like a survival mechanism. This is the only way I'm going to be able to get through this in one piece and relatively coherent and sane. So I really found myself doing a lot of inner work at that time, and subsequently, built up a practice in meditation, and I could probably honestly say that's really when all the floodgates opened after I adopted a regular meditation practice, as far as my receptivity to my spirit guides, doing channeling work and that type of thing. But the seed was planted very early, and at the home front, as far as ideas about differentiating between spirituality and religion, and the circumstances that I went along the way just reinforced reinforced those ideas and encouraged me to take more ownership of developing my own relationship with the divine.
That's an amazing story, because when I hear your experience at law school, I would assume the natural reaction wouldn't be to go within, but to seek acceptance without. And so it's really beautiful that you took that road.
Well, I mean, that's very interesting that you say that. One of my favorite authors is Eckhart Tolle, and when I read The Power of Now, I mean, it just completely knocked me out. But one thing that he said in that book was, the gift in being an outsider is that it forces you out of complacency by default, which is really something that I've kind of held on to, because if I were a white male, for example, there would be little or no incentive to question the framework as it had been designed, because the path had already been created for that journey. As a white male, you get into law school, you pass your classes, and then you've got a job waiting for you on the other side because Uncle Joe, hooked it up for you.
Yes.
But I was a black female, and it became very apparent early on, and in fact in my first year, that I didn't necessarily find a lot of enthusiasm for that path. So by default, you have to ask yourself the question that, well, if this path does not suit me, if this is not what I stand for, what do I stand for? And that inner questioning, that inner working, it's not exactly a very comfortable place to be, but I think it really provided a lot of value for me, because it forced me to articulate what I stood for and what I was all about, which has continued to keep me in good stead, because now that the legal profession has changed so much, and they're experiencing layoffs and things in the profession that nobody could have ever envisioned, you've got, Joe Schmo, who, white male, whatever, who has lost his job and all of a sudden doesn't have any sense of who he is outside of that job, because he's never been forced to question. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I've never been forced to question the status quo, because the entire status quo has been designed for his benefit. So
it's interesting, because when I was looking at your information, something that came to mind, and maybe you can, I'm sort of jumping a little bit here, but it seems that people have lost the sense of themselves, and they are looking more to having external things like nice cars, nice homes, nice jobs to identify themselves as.
Well, I mean, that definitely has been a challenge that people are being forced to look at head on because of these economic times. When you're in a situation where you have lost your job or you're in danger of losing your home, all of a sudden these kind of attachments that we've been relying on so much to give us an identity, to give us a sense of worth, are in danger. So, a lot of people are being forced to really think about these things for the first time. You don't hope to be in a position where there's a saying that you either heed the nudges of the universe or you wait for the 2x4. And for a lot of people, it takes a 2x4 to kind of like wake them up. And, granted, I don't want to say that, I don't want to recommend that people kind of, walk around asleep for that long. But for some people, that is the only thing that's going to motivate them to question the basic premises that they've been walking around with.
So let's go back to your floodgates opening. Now, so you still pursued legal studies, and you're now a practicing attorney, even though it didn't necessarily sit right. Have you put your own spin on that profession? Is that how you got through, or take us from there?
Well, sure, absolutely. I decided that I would go through the program. Because I did have a lot of questions about whether this is the right path for me to take. And even before I was accepted into law school, I wasn't quite sure. So I made the distinct decision that to attend a public law school that was less expensive, that I could foot the bill myself, so I wouldn't come out of the experience with $100,000 worth of loans, which is a lot of what my colleagues did, because I didn't want to be in a situation where I would really be, I guess, forced to take a path of action based on the highest bidder who would pay me the most, versus giving myself time and space to really experiment and find out how I can use this education. So I was practicing for several years and decided to go into academia. So I teach law now, which I think I'm better suited for. And it also gives me a lot more flexibility to pursue these other things that seem to fill up my plate.
Beautiful. That's amazing, the clarity of thought you would have had as an 18, 19-year-old to realize that as you were going into the school to steer your life like that. I mean, hats off to you. It's just beautiful.
Well, I don't know what it was at that time. I mean, because I still look at that time period and wonder what it was that gave me the presence of mind to make that choice, because I was receiving a lot of pressure from, well, you need to go to X prestigious school, this prestigious school, you need to do, you're going to a public law school, couldn't you do better? And I just thought to myself, I am not the kind of person who would be able to sleep at night knowing that I owe $100,000 more or more in school loans. I just know that about myself, even if I don't know anything else. And so that is the kind of thinking that I want to, when I work with my clients, it's just like, yourself, what resonates with you. You really do. And the idea is to honor that by taking steps that are consistent with that understanding that you have about yourself, even if you don't feel like you're completely confident about making those steps. But I am forever grateful, because that would have shifted my entire life experience, having that amount of debt over my head, and limited my abilities to pursue these alternative paths to the degree that I have.
Beautiful. Now, on top of being a professor, you also are a life coach. Do you want to take us through a little bit of what you do with that sort of work?
Well, sure. It's really funny, because I find that all along the way, I guess as far as my life experience is concerned, people seem to have always gravitated towards me I've always been giving advice to people, and I don't know how that really works, but I found this information just coming out of my mouth, and people just like, oh wow, you really helped me, or this is very interesting, or how did you do that? And so this coaching profession is a fairly new phenomenon, but when I did encounter it, it occurred to me that, I've been doing this all along, and I just didn't realize it. So it's just a matter of getting that, professional designation to, because I think one thing it's really difficult for me to see people suffering. It really is, and I don't know, and I don't want to hit people over the head with, what I've picked up along the way, but if people ask me, I am more than happy to help somebody's road become a lot more stressful, because I feel like I've picked up so much as far as my own personal experiences and my the status of being like a traditional outsider for quite a while. I can help other people who are also dealing with the same kind of challenges. So I find that enormously gratifying, and even with my students, because I deal with a lot of non-traditional students, and they're going through their own challenges and trying to get their education and balance respective responsibilities. So I end up being a cheerleader, wherever I happen to be, for whatever reason. But that's just something that just comes out for whatever reason.
Now, does it tie into something that what we wanted to speak about today, what we wanted to focus on was authentic living? So what you're saying about how you have this inherent ability, does that tie into the topic of authentic living?
Well, I think that's what it really comes from. The idea that when we're all kind of tuned in to what people call our inner GPS, we're able to create lives and situations that speak to who we are rather than enduring what other people from outside of us would prescribe for us. Because it's one of the most disconcerting things, I think, in life is to be in a situation that you're not really passionate about or don't even really believe in, but you're there because, well, society says you need to be doing X, Y, and Z. And so you're doing X, Y, and Z, and you're waking up every morning not wanting to get up out of bed. That's enduring life as opposed to enjoying life. And this whole idea of that, let's see how, for example, when I do a lot of intuitive readings, and over time you develop like a visual lexicon of symbols that you can translate and help your clients understand what they're going through. And whenever I see an image of a person with a musical instrument, that kind of shows me that that person is getting closer to realizing their distinct energetic vibration that they're meant to contribute to this larger world symphony, per se.
Oh, beautiful. Have you
So
said that
it
before?
always gives me chills when I see that, because it's just like, okay, that person is getting closer to living and being in the world in alignment with who they really are, what their specific contribution is meant to be. And to me, that's just a beautiful thing, because that's when you are of service to the larger dynamic. When you, in your own way, not everybody has to be a billionaire, not everybody has to, climb Mount Everest, but in your own way, have found your niche, found your place where you feel at home and where you are feeling your best. And so I've always thought it's important to try to create environments or encourage people in a way where they find that and stand firm in that space or niche.
So, is it a common thing people come to you and they're quite successful, cruising along, they've got the 2.5 children and the cute loud puppy, but there's something missing. Is that a common experience of people?
Well, I think definitely more and more people are of that ilk, yeah. And interestingly enough, after 9/11, I think that was a pivotal time for a lot of people to sit down and kind of reevaluate what they were doing and where they were going. Because an event like that can't not change you. Mm-hmm. And I think people felt more permission to kind of sit down and, think about their lives and consider what was working, what they might want to change, what leaps of faith needed to be made in order to, because, life isn't promised. And if you're stepping along in a perfectly acceptable existence, well, maybe there's more out there for you, or less, however you wish to define that for yourself. But it's really important to me to, I keep thinking of that quote, that many people die with their music still in them. Mm. I just think that's horrific. I just think that's upsetting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's something you help people with, releasing their authentic music. Is that
absolutely,
beautiful?
Indeed.
Now you have a new book. Has it been released? ABCs of Authentic Living?
No. This is my first book. Is Reflections of a Mystical Sister. I think you may have run across that. That is actually a collection of essays about authentic living, and it's born out of my experiences in. I actually, through interesting chain of events, I actually relocated from Washington, D.C., where I had been practicing law, to San Diego, California, a city where I knew no one. And I packed up the life, and right before the day before September 11th, actually.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So anybody who has any questions or any doubts that, listening to your intuition is a good idea, they need to talk to me. because I had had a reading actually with a friend of mine who's also a professional intuitive. I think it might have been April of 2001. And, we were finishing up and everything, and she's just like, Idara, I see you in California as clearly as I see the hand in front of my face. And I was like, really? Well, okay, well, that's interesting. And as I hung up the phone, and I was just filled with this excitement about, like, yeah, that would really be great, because I'm sick of Washington, D.C., and I don't want to go through another winter here. And so I just decided that, I was going to, wrap up shop. And within 2 weeks, a good friend of mine who had always liked my house decided that she wanted to buy it. So we
Wow.
so we arranged that, and I arranged to ship my car across the country. And as I took it to the dock to where it's going to be loaded, the car in front of mine had the bumper sticker San Diego State. So just little
Amazing.
so just little things like that that just confirmed to me that it's being cleared for takeoff, literally. And so I wrapped up everything, and the morning of the 11th, I was in my apartment in San Diego, looking out at the water, just thanking Spirit for a safe journey. And my cell phone rang, and it was a friend of mine from D.C., and he's like, well, I knew you were flying out, but I didn't know exactly what time or anything, but are you okay?
Oh, my goodness.
And I was like, well, why wouldn't I be okay? He said, you haven't turned on your television, have you? I just got there, literally, yes. And I had, boxes of, television, and so that's how I got to meet my neighbors in San Diego, because they informed me that, oh, you're here from D.C., did you hear? Yeah, so...
Heartbreaking.
So that's kind of how... So that's, I go into that whole story and the thinking behind it in that book. It's a reflection from a mystical sister, and just the importance of listening to your heart and really valuing it, because it could save your life.
Is listening to your heart the same as having intuition?
Well, I like to think of the heart as the source of the how can I say this? The resource from which it all flows.
Mm-hmm.
And however you want to frame it, I think, there's some people who get wound up around the axle about specific terms and everything, but if you look at approaching the world through two different lenses, through your intellect or through your heart chakra, and you've seen people, I'm sure, that are all in their heads, very intelligent, and, you can get through the world that way. Nobody's going to arrest you if you do. And then you see the folks that are, the airy-fairy types that are skipping along, but, not necessarily, you're not employed, or you live in a van? Oh, really? That's not working for you. So the ideal, to me, I think, is what I like to call integration. It's like when you are able to bring both realms together.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you have a balanced existence, when you are able to partake of the strengths of both arenas and create options that are holistic, that speak to the entirety of the situation, versus going half-cocked in one direction or the other, and you're missing some vital information. One thing that I have taught before, and this whole idea of intuition, because it's kind of a woo-woo topic for a lot of people, but really all it really is expanding your definition of what constitutes information. If you, for example, if you happen to be in a room and you are interviewing somebody for a job, and the applicant walks in and you get goosebumps going up and down your arm while you're sitting there with his resume looking at his Ivy League education, well, if you were looking at it strictly through your intellect, you would see how educated this person was, all his references and everything, and figure that he's the person for the job. But if you also consider the goosebumps that you got coming in the door, and a feeling of dread that accompanied those goosebumps, and take that in conjunction with the education, you have a broader base of information from which to make a decision about whether this applicant is the best applicant for the job. that you might miss if you just decided to, focus on just the credentials on the paper. Do you understand what I'm?
Absolutely. I'm curious that you're speaking of it on that level. Do you find in corporate society that intuition is beginning to be accepted?
Well, to tell you the truth, that is actually one arena that I hope to focus on. When I was in San Diego, I decided to do a doctoral program in metaphysical counseling, and my thesis focused on the application of metaphysical principles in corporate environments. And I think there is definitely more of a receptivity to these ideas in corporate environments, but it's not really publicly announced per se. For example, there are all sorts of stories running around about corporations retaining astrologers to see, to look at the phases of the moon or what have you when they are launching products or something. Whether Mercury retrograde is the best time to launch a product or something like that. Or people who are using intuitives to evaluate job applicants. But, this is all a lot of hearsay. You don't see a lot of official recording of this kind of activity. But I think in the broader context, when you think about, in fact, there's this great quote by Einstein, that the challenges that we are dealing with today cannot be resolved with the same thinking that created these challenges. So, with that in mind, and in order to be to have, more of an advantage, strategically speaking, you have to open up to new approaches of evaluating information and scheduling timing and things of that nature. So I'm thinking that this trend will continue. I hope that we would see more public validation of these type of techniques. But to me, it's not even so important that happen, but it's important for people out there to know that there are options that they can look at as far as to empower themselves to create lives that are more in line with what is really best for them.
That's a beautiful message. Now, do you notice a shift now, knowing that you're intuitive and you've been doing this for a few years, do you notice a shift in mainstream society towards acceptance or even towards, I don't know, waking up to their own intuition? Or do you get where my question's going?
Yeah. I mean, again, I mentioned earlier since 9/11. I mean, definitely that shook a lot of people who were asleep or didn't even know they were asleep. And I also find, whenever we have these big kind of seismic events like earthquakes or a Hurricane Katrina or what have you, you find people who, after the initial shock of the event, who are saying that, oh, by golly, I always wanted to move to Texas, but I never got around to actually doing it until I had to relocate because of the hurricane. So, yeah, again, it's like we're creatures of habit, and for many, the devil that we know is better than the one that we don't. And so we keep repeating these same patterns and wonder why. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Yes, I know that one well.
So I think in the broader macrocosm, where you have institutions that are unraveling that we always thought we could depend on forever, just really big shifts in things and people and events that we thought would always proceed in a certain way. As jarring as it can be personally in dealing with those types of shifts, they could also be the source of one of their greatest accelerations in their personal development. And So I think definitely society is moving in that direction. I think we just have to decide whether we want to accept these shifts with acceptance, or are we going to be, kicking and screaming, the resistance mode? I mean, we do have a choice, and that's tough. I mean, I really, change is tough for everybody. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But unless you're satisfied with the status quo as it is, definitely some adjustments. I mean, couldn't hurt.
Beautiful. Now, this is a question, sort of something that I think about in my own life, so I'm hoping that you'll have an answer for this. I hear a lot about affirmations or, visualizing where you want to be, but then I also hear a lot about staying in the moment and being very present. Finding the balance between visualizing the future versus being really grounded and centered on what's happening right in front of you. Does anyone else in the world have issues with that balance? Because I seem to.
Well, I mean, I don't think they're naturally opposed to one another. I mean, just because you are visualizing what you would want to bring forth into your life does not mean that you are any way denigrating the present moment.
Nice.
I think it's let me see how best to say this. I think both of them need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
You need to go back and forth between the two. But even in the midst of those techniques, the bottom line, I think, is an underlying trust that the universe is unfolding as it should.
Beautiful.
And if you can keep that as the default mechanism, the idea would be that you would be guided in your day-to-day life as to how to devote your time and energy between the two options, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think any time that you are playing an active role in creating the life that you desire, I don't think there can ever be any harm that can come to that. I think the challenge comes in when we get attached to how that good should look like.
Oh, that's it. That's what I do. You hit the nail on the head.
You do? I have never heard of anybody. You must be the only one.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Because, Buddha says attachment is the root of all suffering.
Yes.
And granted, we all have a spark of the divine within us, but the gal upstairs has a much broader perspective on what your life experience is meant to be like. So you don't quite have all the information in front of you. And if you can relinquish, take your hands off the wheel, get your nails out of the
oh no,
off the steering or out of the steering wheel just a little bit, just to allow for the fact that, okay, I don't have all the information, but I know that everything is conspiring towards my highest and best good.
Beautiful.
So if I can just kind of keep that in mind, you don't get freaked out as much by the ups and downs that that present itself in our daily lives.
Absolutely.
Because it's really funny. I sometimes when I really started doing readings professionally when I was in San Diego, I would have people come in and ask about some woman coming in and asking is John going to call me, kind of thing, and I'm like. Whereas, I would have messages about their higher purpose and, their life experiences, and all they would want to know is whether John is going to call. And I'm like, so I remember working with another intuitive company, and I met a guy who also did readings, and he said, I'm not the kind of person to ask whether X is going to call, but I am the kind of person. If you need to know why you need X to call. And I think that is a very important distinction, because the attachment, it's like that question is John going to call? There's an underlying attachment there that most people don't even realize. It's like, why is your well-being, dependent on whether John calls? That's what we need to be looking at. Because if you don't, you're going to be coming back to me 6 months from now and asking whether Rich is going to call. And we haven't made any progress here because you're still hinging your personal happiness and well-being on the actions on somebody else. And that's a great recipe for continued frustration.
That is a beautiful story to highlight it as well. That's really, it's so enjoying how you explain things. It's, I could take so many quotes out of here that I would consider to be gems, like true famous quotes of what you've said. So wonderful. Thank you. Now, I asked this question of a lot of my guests, and I love to hear what comes out, and I'm so curious what you're going to say. What's been your biggest inspiration?
Ooh, boy. That is a tough one. I think the biggest gift that the universe has given to me, bestowed upon me, is the gift of being an outsider. I mean, because even though it hasn't been an easy life path to take, it has given me perspective on things that happen and forced me to ask a lot of questions that I wouldn't even have need to ask if I was like, a member of the Caucasian race, or if I were really popular in school, or you see what I'm saying? Because it's, I don't know how else I could say this, but it's what I consider myself to be an observer of life in many respects. And because of that status, not to say that I'm detached from society, but I'm very good at pulling back from what I see going on around me and trying to extract some truth from it. And not only trying to extract some truth from it, but actually trying to live those truths. And I think that's the challenge that people have. I mean, I remember running across a quote, I guess by Buckminster Fuller, I'm not quite sure, that a lot of people just, see a truth, look down, and like keep walking. And that's perfectly fine if that, maybe that's the path that person is supposed to travel in this lifetime. But I think there's something to be said for extracting truth from your experience and making decisions that are in alignment with that truth. And that's one thing that I really, really do with when I'm training people as far as developing their intuition. It's like when you get an intuitive insight, you honor that insight by either thanking the source of that insight or taking an action that reflects that insight. I mean, for example, if you're stepping out of your house and you get this intuitive flash that, gosh, I should take an umbrella. But you shut your door, get in your car, and go to work and don't do that. Well, it's going to be less likely that those intuitive flashes will come to you because Spirit's obviously this is a place where they're not welcome. And when it starts to rain later on, you're like, well, by golly, I should have used that information.
So intuition is a use it or lose it type thing.
Well, it's a muscle that you develop. I think everybody has it.
Wow.
I really do. So if you see somebody who's walking around saying that I'm the one who has this special power that, has come to me from the ages, run. Because I really do feel that everybody has access to divine guidance, intuition, whatever you want to call it. But you have to make the choice to develop it. And that's the choice that I made. It takes practice. I was doing practice readings. I was sitting there with my head exploding with headaches, with just because of the resistance. Because I have to think, Reverend Jim Webb, who is one of my first formal teachers as far as intuitive development was concerned. He was in my corner as to my ability to do this, even before I believed I can do it.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So, when I would say, like, oh, I'm not seeing anything, oh, my head's hurting, and he would be just like, oh, come on, girlfriend. Keep on keeping on. And actually, he's the one that encouraged me to start doing readings for this particular church I was attending at the time, publicly. And so I'm forever grateful that, he was cheering me on in that respect, because it's a skill set that I really enjoy using and been using ever since.
That's beautiful. Now, you've touched on so many things today, and you're a wealth of information. If people want to read more or hear more, do you have a website or somewhere you would direct them to?
Yeah, in fact, I've got a couple of things that people can jump on the bandwagon. One of the first things I wanted to let the listeners know about is a teleclass I will be holding in June on authentic living. It is called Authentic Living, a Personal Empowerment Teleclass, and it will take place from June the 1st through the 22nd. And and we will be really going to the nitty-gritty of jump-starting your efforts to live authentically, about how to embrace change with grace, moving past self-imposed limitations, and increasing your overall confidence. So that is definitely something I am very excited about. It is based primarily on my book, Reflections of a Mystical Sister, and will feature a lot of interactive exercises and group processing work. And so I'm very excited about that. So if anyone is interested in signing up for that, it is limited to 8 participants, because I like to work with smaller groups and give more personal attention. And so anyone who might be interested in reserving a spot, they can email me at lifecoachbassey, all one word, at AOL.com. And I'll zip out a registration form out to you guys, and so get that process going. And again, I've mentioned my book. That is a labor of love, and just the story of that book coming together is another week and a half discussion. But it is Reflection of a Mystical Sister, Sistah, that's colloquialism for a woman of color. And so that's available at all fine online outlets. Most people tend to get them from either Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com. And I am, of course, on Facebook. I have my own Facebook page at One Light Messenger. That's ONELIGHT Messenger, all one word. And that's where I really give people kind of like a daily or weekly update of what I'm up to and what programs are out and about. So, just really gotta, and can't forget Twitter. That's a recent incarnation. Oh my goodness, I joined a few weeks ago, and I'm just, my head is spinning at how fast that social networking tool is. But my Twitter handle is One Light Messenger, and that's the number 1. Then Light Messenger. So
beautiful. Yeah. Wonderful. Now, to close off the interview, I was wondering if you would give us your final words of wisdom for today.
Well, I have to say that I like to look at the big picture a lot, and we are living in unprecedented times, in case you happen to have been living under a rock for the past couple of years. And I think we're at a point where the world really would benefit from the authentic participation of all its participants, all of its inhabitants. And to do that, we need to move beyond a herd mentality of sorts, because we kind of see where that approach to living and being has gotten us, and try something different. So the minute you get an inkling about doing something new or reading a book that you may not have considered before, or even wearing a color you may not have thought about, all these things are, I just want to be the person to encourage that kind of exploration because we need some new solutions. And it's not going to come from, keeping with the status quo. And so even finding spaces in your life where people appreciate your unique perspective, that's going to encourage discussion, that's going to encourage needed changes, and bring a new energy to the planet so we can solve some of these more vexing issues. And that's where it just comes from the individual deciding that they matter, their particular views and thoughts matter, even if it's different from anything that has come before up until this point. So one authentic person can really change a lot around them. So that's I think my life mission, to encourage that and support people in realizing that about themselves.
What a beautiful mission. And thank you so much for your time today. It was such a pleasure to listen to you speak. You're so filled with knowledge, and I wish you many blessings, Idira.
Thank you, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here.